Unsung Murder Ballads discusses topics of a disturbing nature.
And we're not going to hold back on the graphic details and disturbing content.
So we do not recommend our podcast for children under the age of 13.
And while we respect the victims and their families involved in these tragic cases,
we're also going to be critical of mistakes that are made during the investigations.
And we're going to use dark humor to express ourselves now and then.
So with that said, this podcast may not be for everyone.
And that's okay. We're glad you're here checking us out.
And if you've made it this far, welcome to the Unsung Murder Ballads family. And follow us on Instagram at Unsung Murder Ballads if you want to talk to us.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Unsung Murder Ballads. This is episode 60. I am Janice Dead.
I'm Jameson Dead.
I'm Joyous Dead.
And I'm Shark Dead.
So a couple days ago, you heard part 1 of the John Wayne Gacy case for Joyous's information. And now, a couple days later, we are going to start part 2. Keep in mind that we did cover a lot of his murders and his early life, so we are jumping in a little later. So if you missed part 1, please go back and listen to it now. And I did say that today, the day we're going to release it, was the original anniversary, and I realized that was incorrect. The original first anniversary for us, like our official anniversary, was when part 1 aired. This is airing on the anniversary of our second episode, which we released a few days after our first. So there was some confusion, but hey, I'm only human. So yeah, let's jump right back into this case. So Gacy's next victim was 18-year-old Robert Gilroy, the son of a Chicago police sergeant.
Okay, now he's getting ballsy.
Dumbass. I can't believe he got away with it for this long.
Robert was last seen alive in September, and he only lived 4 blocks away from Gacy's house.
Idiots.
Wow.
Yeah.
He's such a predator.
It's so bad.
Crimes happen close to home.
10 days after Robert was last seen, 19-year-old former Marine John Mowery disappeared after leaving his mother's house. Gacy strangled him and buried his body beneath his master bedroom. On October 17th, 21-year-old Russell Nelson disappeared, and he was last seen leaving a Chicago bar. And of course, he was looking for work in construction. Gacy murdered him and buried him beneath his guest bedroom. Less than 4 weeks later, Gacy murdered 16-year-old Robert Winch, as well as 21-year-old Tommy Bowling, who disappeared in November after leaving a bar.
So many.
What's our total at right now? Do we know?
I wasn't keeping track. I'm sorry.
I want to know how many ended up in the crawl space.
33.
Okay.
Oh.
That's the final number.
Wow.
So on December 9th, 19-year-old U.S. Marine David Talsma disappeared after telling his mother he was going to attend a rock concert in Hammond, Indiana. Gacy strangled David with a ligature and buried him in the crawl space close to John Mowery. On December 30th, Gacy abducted 19-year-old college student Robert Donnelly from the bus station at gunpoint.
That's not his normal thing.
No, it's not. However, Robert would survive.
Wow.
Gacy drove him to his home, where he raped, tortured, and repeatedly drowned Robert to unconsciousness in the bathtub.
Oh.
Yeah.
This is getting more and more brutal.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
tough.
Well, the funny thing is, because this guy survived, we're seeing a piece that we had never seen before. So maybe he did this to every victim.
That is a good point. Although, like, I feel like when he had people living with him, it would be hard logistically.
Yes, I agree. But we're going to get to some of that stuff later, too, because there's a lot of questions about what these kids knew and didn't know. So while he was drowning him, he would pull his head up and say shit like, "Aren't we having fun playing games tonight?"
Oh my goodness.
Why so serious?
Exactly. Robert later testified at trial that he was in so much pain that he kept asking Gacy to kill him, at which point Gacy would say, quote, "I'm getting round to it," unquote.
Ooh.
How did he escape?
Well, nice segue. After several hours, Gacy drove Robert to his workplace and released him, warning him that if he contacted police, they wouldn't believe him.
Classic.
Wow.
So
I
Robert,
wonder, because he was begging him to kill him, he said, "Fuck you, I'm not going to kill you."
maybe it's that
He
kind of
lost
power thing.
interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, reverse psychology.
So Robert reported the assault to police, and they went and questioned Gacy on January 6th. Gacy admitted to having a sex slave relationship with Robert,
Ugh.
but he insisted that everything was consensual, adding that he, quote, unquote, didn't pay the kid the money he promised him.
Ugh. So he's like, just ew.
Yep.
Ew.
The police believed Gacy and filed no charges.
Are you...
Don't they realize
You
all
weren't
these
kidding about
people are
the police
disappearing?
sucking.
You both made great comments. No, the police don't realize, and yes, the police absolutely suck. The following month, Gacy killed 19-year-old William Kindred, who disappeared on February 16th after telling his fiancée, who knew Gacy, that he was going to a bar. Now, William would be the final victim that was buried in the crawl space. On March 21st, Gacy lured 26-year-old Jeffrey Rignall into his car. Gacy used chloroform on him and drove him to his house, where his arms and head were restrained in a pillory device affixed to his ceiling, and his feet were locked into another device.
Ugh.
He raped and tortured Jeffrey with instruments including lit candles,
Hey.
whips, and repeatedly chloroformed him into unconsciousness.
This
Gacy,
is so fucked.
yeah, this guy's awful. Gacy then dumped Jeffrey in Chicago's Lincoln Park, unconscious but alive. Jeffrey managed to stagger to his girlfriend's apartment. Police were informed of the assault but did not investigate Gacy.
How on earth are there
Oh
multiple
my
allegations
God.
Wow.
and no one's investigating?
Well, he's the guy who, it can't be Gacy. He shows up at the Democratic Party dressed as a clown.
Ugh.
Awful.
Now, Jeffrey was able to recall what Gacy's car looked like, his Oldsmobile, as well as the exit they took on the Kennedy Expressway. So what he did was him and two of his friends just hung out at that exit, waiting to see Gacy's car, which happened in April of that year, and they followed him to his house. They then called the police, and Gacy was finally arrested on July 15th. He faced trial for the assault and battery against Jeffrey Rignall, and you would think that this might slow or maybe even stop Gacy's killing spree, but
Not at all.
But you would be wrong. Exactly.
No.
Ooh.
By mid-'78, his crawl space had no more room for bodies, which is why he started not killing people. Now, Gacy later confessed to police that he considered stowing bodies in his attic, but was worried about complications from leakage.
You don't like leakage. I remember that.
So he started to dispose of the bodies of his victims by throwing them off the I-55 bridge into the Des Plaines River. His first known victim thrown from that bridge was 20-year-old Timothy O'Rourke. Timothy was murdered in mid-July after leaving his apartment to go buy cigarettes. Shortly before his disappearance, Timothy had told his roommate that a contractor had offered him a job. On November 4th, Gacy killed 19-year-old Frank Lanigan. He was last seen alive by his father walking down Foster Avenue. His naked body was found close to an inlet in the Des Plaines River by two duck hunters on November 12th.
Ugh.
I know, it doesn't stop. It's crazy. On November 24th, 20-year-old James Mazzara disappeared after Thanksgiving dinner with his family.
On Thanksgiving?
James had informed his sister that day that he was going to start working in construction.
Oh.
On the afternoon of December 11th, 1978, Gacy visited the Nissan pharmacy in Des Plaines to discuss potentially remodeling that store with owner Phil Torf. Now, this is where I said when he started taking on that second job, when he opened that pharmacy remodeling business, this is the linchpin that was going to really send his dominoes down. While he was in that pharmacy, he was within earshot of 15-year-old part-time employee Robert Peist. Gacy mentioned that his company often hired teenage boys at a wage starting at $5 an hour, which was almost double what he was earning at the pharmacy. I know, it sounds so little today.
No, it sounds like a lot for those days. I don't know.
Yeah. So, an important side note. A 17-year-old girl named Kimberly Byers was working the cash register that day. And as that register was near the front door and it was cold outside, she had asked Robert if she could wear his jacket while she worked, and he obliged. At one point that day, Kimberly had ordered photos to be developed, and she had torn off the little strip at the top of the package. And instead of throwing it away, she had put that little slip in the pocket of Robert's coat. Now, keep that in your back pocket.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Shortly after Gacy left after looking at the pharmacy, Robert's mother arrived at the store to drive Robert home so that they could celebrate her birthday. Robert asked for his mother to wait and to come back because he wanted to talk to a contractor about a job.
Oh, yep. I see how this falls.
He left the store at 9 p.m., promising to return shortly, but he never returned due to Gacy telling him that he needed him to go with him to his home to talk about the job. Robert was murdered shortly after 10 p.m. at Gacy's home.
Oh.
Gacy later stated that at his house he gave Robert a soft drink before asking him if there was anything he, quote, wouldn't do for the right price, unquote.
Ugh.
To which Robert replied that he didn't mind working hard. In response, Gacy stated that good money could be earned by hustling, but Robert was dismissive. Gacy then used his tried and true trick and got Robert into handcuffs.
Ugh.
Damn.
When Robert failed to return to work, his family filed a missing persons report with the Des Plaines police. Now, Phil Torf, the pharmacy owner, named Gacy as the contractor that Robert was most likely talking about. Lieutenant John Kozenak, whose son also attended the same school as Robert, chose to start investigating Gacy further.
Finally.
A check of Gacy's criminal background revealed that he had been held on outstanding battery charges in Chicago and had been imprisoned in Iowa for the sodomy of a 15-year-old boy.
I thought that was sealed.
Well, I mean, it's sealed from the public. Like, it's no
Oh,
longer...
right.
The
But
police
not from
can...
an actual.
Yeah, like, no matter what it says, like, the police can see everything I've ever been caught for, all the way down to, like, when I was a little kid kind of thing. Anything that was ever put in a report, the police can still see. So Kozenak and two Des Plaines police officers visited Gacy at his home the following evening. Gacy was adamant that he had not offered Robert a job. Gacy promised that he would come to the station later that evening to make a statement indicating that he was unable to do so at the moment because his uncle had just died.
Excuses.
Yep.
When questioned as to how soon he could come to the police station, Gacy responded with, "You guys are very rude. Don't you have any respect for the dead?" Which, coming from a guy like him, right?
That is
Yeah.
very brazen of him.
So at 3 a.m., Gacy arrived at the police station covered in mud, saying, "Hey, I'm here for my statement."
Yeah,
That's
what's with the
not
mud?
sketchy.
Yeah, so when they asked him about the mud, he said, "Oh, I was in a car accident on my way here." And they were like, "Well, there's no
What?
one..." Yeah,
I'm sorry, what?
yeah. And they were like, "Well, there's no one here to take your statement now. You have to come back later." We'll get into all the details of what happened in a moment, but for
This
now...
is weird as shit.
Yeah, but
Wow.
for now, yeah. So on returning to the police station later that day, Gacy denied any involvement in Robert's disappearance and repeated that he had not offered him a job. At the request of detectives, Gacy prepared a written statement detailing his movement on December 11th. Now, they suspected that Gacy was holding Robert at his home, and the Des Plaines police obtained a search warrant on December 13th. This search revealed several suspicious items, including several police badges, a starter pistol, a syringe, handcuffs, books on
The handcuffs.
books on homosexuality and pederasty. Pedastry?
What's pederasty?
That's a term used for a sexual relationship between a grown man and a young boy.
Ugh.
Oh, like pedophile.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Gross.
They found pornographic films, capsules of amyl nitrate, a dildo, a 2x4 with holes drilled in each end, bottles of Valium and atropine, several driver's licenses, a blue hooded parka, and underwear that was far too small to fit Gacy.
Oh, that's so upsetting.
They also found a class ring engraved with the initials JAS. That JAS was John Sick. They also found Kimberly's photo receipt that was in the pocket of the jacket in Gacy's trash can, along with a 36-inch section of nylon rope.
Mm,
Yeah,
Pretty
okay,
damning.
guilty.
So the Des Plaines police confiscated Gacy's car as well as his PDM work vehicles. Surveillance teams, consisting of officers Mike Albrecht and David Hochmeister, and Ronald Robinson and Robert Schultz, monitored Gacy as this investigation continued.
I can't believe they couldn't arrest him with all this.
It's all circumstantial and doesn't exactly point to... Because at this point, they're just looking for a missing kid.
Right, that's fair, yeah.
So the following...
You're allowed to have weird things in your house, I guess, legally.
Yeah, that's true. Nothing... I mean, some of it's really suspicious, but I guess technically nothing's illegal. So the following day, investigators received a phone call from Michael Rossi, who informed investigators of Gregory Goddick's disappearance and the fact that another PDM employee, Charles Hatala, had both been found drowned in the Illinois River earlier that year.
Well, getting sus.
So on December 15th, Des Plaines investigators obtained further details of Gacy's battery charge, learning about complainant Jeffrey Rignall that had reported Gacy having lured him into the car, chloroformed him, raped, tortured him, and dumped him in Lincoln Park. Somehow they hadn't put that one together with the rest of it. In an interview with Gacy's former wife that same day, they learned about the disappearance of John Butchevich. The same day, the class ring was traced to John Alec Zick. An interview with Zick's mother revealed that several other items were missing from her son's apartment, one of which was a Motorola television. On December 16th, Gacy was becoming more affable with his surveillance, the detectives, and he started regularly inviting them to join him for meals in restaurants or for drinks at a bar or even in his home.
This guy
He's a piece of work.
really is.
He repeatedly denied involvement in Robert's disappearance and accused officers of harassing him because of his political connections and or his recreational drug use.
Oh, that's
This
just
is
a
the first we're
sad
hearing of
out.
this.
Knowing
Sounds familiar.
I was
with,
going to say it sounds
the
way
local...
way too modern. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Knowing these officers were unlikely to arrest him for anything trivial, Gacy flaunted that by running through traffic lights or trying to lose them as they were following him throughout the city.
Oh, weird.
Yeah.
That's weird behavior.
Well, he's fucking with them. Because if they
Right.
arrest him for running a red light, they could fuck up their whole case.
That's true.
So it's around this time that David Cram consented to a police interview in which he revealed that because of his poor timekeeping, Gacy had once given him a watch and explained that he had got it from a dead person.
Whoa.
Okay.
Investigators concluded formal interviews with Michael Rossi on December 17th. He informed them that Gacy had sold him Zick's car, explaining that he had bought it from the kid because he needed money to move to California, which we've kind of said earlier. Further examination of Gacy's car revealed a small cluster of fibers in his trunk that they thought might be human hair. That evening, 3 trained search dogs were used to determine whether or not Robert had been present in any of Gacy's vehicles.
Oh, no.
One of the cadaver dogs laid on the passenger seat of Gacy's Oldsmobile, and what the dog handler referred to as a death reaction, indicating that it was Robert Peast's body that had been present.
Oh, first of all, dogs are incredible.
Dogs are amazing. Oh my God.
It's incredible that they can do that, but that's also, harrowing.
That same day, Gacy invited detectives Albrecht and Hochmeister to a restaurant for a meal. And then the next day he invited them to another restaurant where over breakfast he discussed his business, his marriage, and his clowning.
What a sentence.
During that conversation, Gacy said, clowns can even get away with murder.
Wow.
Yeah, he's fucking ballsy.
Yeah, that's insane.
This guy.
However, by December 18th, Gacy was beginning to display signs of strain from the constant surveillance. He was
Mhm.
unshaven, he looked tired and anxious, and began drinking heavily. That afternoon, he drove to his lawyer's office to prepare a $75,000 civil lawsuit against the Des Plaines police, demanding that they cease their surveillance.
Damn.
That same day, the Nissan Pharmacy photo receipt found in Gacy's kitchen was traced back to Kimberly Byers, and she stated that she had borrowed Robert's parka, and goes through the whole process, the stuff we already know. So
Mhm.
now they know for a fact that Robert was in his home.
Right.
So at the same time, they're interviewing Rossi for a second time, and this time he was a bit more cooperative. He informed detectives that in the summer of '77, at Gacy's behest, he was told to spread 10 bags of lime in the crawl space under Gacy's house.
Ooh, that's
So they're getting
weird.
somewhere now.
On December 19th, investigators began compiling evidence for a second search warrant of Gacy's home. That same day, Gacy's lawyers filed the lawsuit against the police. This is almost like a movie, where they're running against
Yeah.
each other.
It really is.
The
And,
hearing.
and I hope they bring those dogs to the house.
Oh my God, can you imagine? Those dogs would probably die of a heart attack.
Oh,
For
yeah.
real.
So the hearing for the suit was scheduled for December 22nd. That afternoon, Gacy invited the surveillance detectives inside his home again.
He is really trying to be like, no, look, there's nothing
Exactly.
to see here.
So they're like, okay, let's go in. So as Officer Robinson distracted Gacy with conversation, Officer Schultz walked down into Gacy's bedroom in an attempt to write down the serial number on the Motorola television set that he saw there that he suspected belonged to John Zick. However, when flushing Gacy's toilet, the officer noted a smell that he suspected was rotting corpses coming out of the heating duct.
Oh, God.
Gross.
Yeah. Now, the reason they hadn't smelt this the first time they were invited was that it was cold in the house. But this time, it was like the house was heated, so they could start to smell these things.
Ugh.
You didn't even need the dog.
So investigators interviewed both David Cram and Michael Rossi again on December 20th. When questioned as to where they believed Gacy concealed Robert's body, Michael replied that Gacy may have placed the body in the crawl space, remarking that Gacy's insistence that when he was told to dig ditches down there, that he not deviate any little bit from where he was told to dig.
Yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
damning.
Now, David Cram informed investigators of Gacy's attempts to rape him in '76, and he stated that after he and Gacy had returned to his home after the December 13th search, Gacy had turned pale after seeing a clod of mud on his carpet and immediately entered the crawl space and started looking around to see if there was any evidence that someone had been in his home and in that crawl space.
Oh.
When asked whether he had ever been in the crawl space, David replied that he had once been asked by Gacy to spread lime down there and to also dig trenches, and Gacy always told him it was for drainage pipes. So at this point, the police know what they're looking for.
Right, they know exactly where they're looking
Yeah.
for and what they'll find.
So on the evening of December 20th, Gacy drove to his lawyer's office in an attempt to schedule a meeting and ostensibly discuss the process of the lawsuit. Gacy appeared anxious and disheveled and immediately asked for alcohol.
Oof. Yeah, he's falling apart.
Now think about someone who's been killing at the pace that he has, and now he can't kill anymore because they're all over him.
Right, that's true. That's definitely,
He's having withdrawal.
Yeah, it's like a drug. Yeah.
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 Yeah, good
And I mean,
point,
constant
Jameson.
surveillance will make you crazy for sure. So that's a double whammy there.
So his lawyer, Sam Amarante, fetched a bottle of whiskey, and Gacy immediately drank down 2 large cupfuls.
Yeah, gross.
Amarante at this stage had become kind of dubious of Gacy's claims of innocence.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked Gacy what he wanted to discuss with them. And then in doing so, he laid down a copy of the newspaper showing an article about Robert Peist's disappearance. And the lawyer said, quote, "You said you had something to tell me, something important." Gacy picked up the newspaper, pointed at the front page, and said, "This boy is dead. He's in a river."
Woo!
Wow.
Gacy then proceeded to give a rambling confession that ran into the early morning hours of the morning.
To his lawyer?
To his lawyer.
At that point, how much do you believe, though? He just slammed down a bunch of whiskey and he's out of his mind because of everything that's going on.
Well, we'll get to all of that. He began by stating that he had been the judge, jury, and executioner of many, many people, and that he now wanted to be the same for himself.
What the?
Yep.
What a narcissist.
Yep. He said that he had murdered at least 30 victims, most of whom he had buried in his crawl space, and had disposed of 5 other bodies in the river. Gacy
So, as a lawyer, are you allowed to report that, or do you have to keep your client's secrets?
Isn't it if somebody else's life is in danger, aren't you required to report something?
But there's no immediate threat. But we're gonna,
right.
we're
That's
gonna,
like you're thinking of like a mandated reporter.
Yeah, but we'll get into all of that in a moment. Gacy was very dismissive of his victims, calling them male prostitutes, hustlers, liars, and adding that he sometimes woke up to find, quote, dead, strangled kids, unquote, with their hands cuffed behind their back.
It's really coming out, huh?
Well, Gacy in his ramblings talked about how he believed that these men, boys, became his property once they were dead.
Oh my God, that's not you.
Wow.
Yeah, he genuinely believed that once he killed them, they were his to do what he wanted with. So fucked up.
I don't know where he got that idea.
So as a result of all the alcohol he was drinking, Gacy fell asleep midway through his confession.
Whoa.
Oh, I would have slammed on the
Yeah.
table and made him continue to talk.
So this little side note here. There's an awesome documentary about Gacy on Netflix that has this lawyer being interviewed, and his reaction at this point was fucking hysterical. He's like, I'm shaking. I was like, what the fuck do I do? So Amarante immediately arranged a psychiatric appointment for Gacy. But upon waking several hours later, Gacy shook his head and informed his lawyer that he had confessed, saying like, I don't care what I just said. I can't think about that right now. I have things to do.
I'm surprised he didn't say it was a joke.
So ignoring his lawyer's advice regarding the psychiatric appointment, Gacy left to attend to whatever his business was. After leaving his lawyer's office, Gacy drove to a gas station where he handed a small bag of marijuana to the attendant, who immediately handed the bag over to the FBI agents that were following him.
Yep.
He said that Gacy told him, quote, "The end is coming. These guys are going to kill me," unquote. The surveillance officers also noted that Gacy was holding a rosary around his chin and praying the whole time he was driving down the highway. So,
interesting religious twist.
Weird, right? But upon hearing that from the surveillance detective, basically they became concerned that he was going to commit suicide.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the police decided they were going to arrest him for possession and distribution of cannabis in order to hold him in custody so that they could get this second search warrant done.
Well, there's a strat.
So at 4:30 on December 21st, the eve of the hearing of his civil lawsuit, he was arrested and the second warrant was granted. After police informed Gacy of their intentions to search the crawl space for the body of Robert, Gacy denied the teenager was buried there, but confessed to having killed in self-defense a different person that was buried under his garage.
He's trying to lead him in the opposite direction.
Well, don't forget, there is one body in his garage that he had covered with concrete.
Right, so he's hoping, they'll only find that one.
Correct. So armed with their search warrant, police and evidence technician drove to Gacy's house. What they found, however, was that Gacy had unplugged the sump pump, and that flooded the crawl space with water. They had to replace the plug and wait for the water to drain. So it was at this point that evidence technician Daniel Gentry entered the 28 by 38 foot crawl space and crawled to the southwest corner and began digging.
Oh.
Within minutes, he uncovered the putrefied remains of a human arm bone.
Oh.
But of course, this had been there for far too long, and it wasn't Robert. So he began digging some more and uncovered 2 lower leg bones.
Oh, God.
And it's at this point that he yells up saying, "I think this place is full of kids."
Oh,
Ooh.
So at this point, the technician soon discovered a skull, and later excavation led to feet of yet another victim.
Oh.
Because of this, technicians returned to the trench where the first body was unearthed. Like they're just digging and fucking finding rib cages, and they're just suddenly it's realizing how many bodies might actually be buried there.
Oh.
okay, John Wayne, you better not get out of jail now.
After being informed that the police had found human remains in his crawl space and that he now would face murder charges, Gacy told officers he wanted to clear the air. In the early morning hours of December 22nd, in the presence of his lawyers, Gacy provided a formal statement in which he confessed to murdering approximately 30 young men, all of whom he claimed entered his house willingly, which may have been true. Some victims were referred to by name, but Gacy claimed not to know or remember most of their names. He claimed that all of them
Fucked.
were teenage runaways or male prostitutes. And the majority of them, of course, were buried in the crawl space. Gacy claimed to have dug only 5 of the graves in this location and had his employees dig the remaining trenches so that he would have graves available, including Gregory Godzik, who was buried in one of those graves.
Oh, that's so fucked.
Wow.
When shown a driver's license issued to Robert Haston, which had been found on his property, Gacy claimed not to know him, but admitted that this license had been in the possession of one of his victims.
Weird.
Yeah, so he just doesn't remember killing this kid. How fucked up is
Ugh.
that? Yeah.
Fucked.
Yeah, they were like, nothing to him.
In January of 79, he had planned to conceal the corpses even further by covering the entire crawl space with concrete.
Oh.
When questioned specifically about Robert Peast, Gacy confessed to luring him to his house and strangling him on December 11th. He also admitted to having slept alongside Robert's body that evening before disposing of the corpse in the Des Plaines River in the early hours of the 13th.
Ugh.
So what he had done was that he had, after the cops came and he told them he would, whatever, his uncle had died and he would go see them tomorrow, he drove and dumped the body in the river. But he actually had a traffic accident after disposing of Robert's body.
Oh.
His vehicle had slid off the ice-covered road, and he had to get a tow truck to help him get it out.
Wow. So that was actually true.
That part was actually true, so he decided to be a dick and go to the police station at 3 a.m. covered in mud. The twisted part of this interview is Gacy talks about these bodies being his, that once they were dead, they were his, and he thought the police were going to agree with him.
What the
Yeah,
fuck?
he was out of his fucking mind. So accompanied by police, his lawyer, and his older sister, Gacy was driven to the I-55 bridge on December 23rd to pinpoint the precise spot where he confessed to having thrown the body of Robert Peast and 4 other victims into the river. Gacy was taken to his house and instructed to mark the garage floor with orange spray paint to show them where they needed to dig to find the other bodies, the body of John Butovich. To assist officers in their search, Gacy drew a rough diagram of his crawl space to indicate where the bodies had been buried. 26 bodies were unearthed from Gacy's crawl space over the next week.
Oh.
Oh my God.
There were 3 others unearthed elsewhere on the property, and plus the 5 that he threw into the river, which brought his total up to 33 murders.
Imagine being this guy's neighbor.
Oh my God, I'd move.
Be like, what the fuck?
Or I'd buy his house. I haven't figured that out yet.
Just level it.
So at the request of his defense counsel, Gacy spent over 300 hours with doctors in the year before his trial.
Whoa.
He underwent a variety of psychological tests to determine whether he was mentally competent to stand trial.
Was he?
Well, we'll get there.
I was like, I'm waiting for Jameson to say his piece.
I'm waiting for that magical line there.
We'll get there. Gacy attempted to convince the doctors that he had multiple personality disorder,
Huh.
and his lawyers
Sure.
opted to have Gacy plead not guilty by reason of insanity,
There it is.
presenting him as a Jekyll and Hyde character.
Now,
Ugh.
I had actually thought about that earlier in the case when you brought up, him waking up to
Bodies, yeah.
the bodies, and it would make sense with the multiple personality angle.
Thankfully, they didn't go that route.
Instead of Jekyll
No,
and
I see
Hyde,
what you're
was
saying,
it
that it could add
Patches?
up.
No, what was it? Patches and I don't know, Poco or something.
Patches and
Those are his
Pogo.
two personalities.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Gacy's defense team suggested that all 33 deaths were caused by accidental erotic asphyxia.
Come the fuck
What?
on.
Yep. But prosecutors called that highly improbable.
Yeah. Ridiculous, I dare say.
Yes. Now, Jeffrey Rignall, one of his surviving victims, testified for the defense on February 21st. Rignall wept repeatedly while describing Gacy's torture of him back in March of '78. During specific cross-examination relating to torture, Rignall vomited and was excused from further testimony. Can you imagine witnessing someone vomit on the stand?
Ugh.
The jury at that point must have been like, everything he says is true.
Yeah.
At the close of his argument, the prosecuting attorney had the crawl space opening from Gacy's home brought into the courtroom.
What?
Whoa.
He then removed the photos of Gacy's 22 identified victims from the display board and asked the jury not to show sympathy but to show justice, as Gacy had shown his victims no sympathy, and then he threw the photos through the opening of the crawl space.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's damning.
Yeah, and then the defense attorney during that documentary said at that moment, the drama of that, he knew he lost the case.
Oh yeah. When you're bringing
You
that
can't
much
come back
drama,
from that.
Yeah. The jury deliberated for only an hour and 50 minutes.
I'm surprised it took him that long.
Yeah, there's probably a bunch of charges and they have to decide which ones to charge.
He was found guilty of 33 charges of murder. He was
Wow.
also found guilty of sexual assault and taking indecent liberties with a child.
That's an interesting name for the charge, but
You know, we've seen some weird ones, haven't we?
indeed.
At the time of his conviction, the 33 murders was the most of which any person in U.S. history had been convicted.
Wow.
In the sentencing phase of his trial, the jury deliberated for more than 2 hours before sentencing Gacy to death for each murder committed after the Illinois statute of capital punishment came into effect in June of '77.
Oh.
He was set to be executed on June 2nd, 1980. On being sentenced, Gacy was transferred to the Menard Correctional Center, where he remained on death row for 14 years.
So
Isolated.
interesting. They always stay there for a very long time.
You have the appeals process. It's kind of, I don't know. There's a whole thing. I don't get it.
Right.
While in isolation in prison, Gacy began to paint. And his paintings, like he painted pictures of himself as a clown and shit. His paintings have been displayed at exhibitions and even sold at auctions.
Oh, that's fucked.
So before his trial, Gacy initiated contact with journalist Russ Ewing, to whom he granted numerous interviews between 1979 and 1981. The information Gacy divulged to Ewing regarding the circumstances of his first murder proved instrumental in identifying his first victim.
Wow.
On February 15th, 1983, Henry Brishbaum, a fellow death row inmate known as the I-57 killer, stabbed Gacy in the arm with a sharpened wire.
Damn.
I know, right?
That's interesting.
Gacy received treatment at the prison hospital, but unfortunately, he didn't die. After the U.S. Supreme Court denied Gacy's final appeal in October of 1993, the Illinois Supreme Court formally set his execution date for May 10th, 1994.
Wow.
Now, it's funny because we're doing this as a for Joyous's information, but despite Gacy being one of the biggest serial killer cases in the U.S., I had not actually heard about him until I read a book in the 90s written by a college student who, after hearing that Gacy was going to be executed, started writing letters to him.
Whoa.
He basically, it wasn't just Gacy, he wrote letters to every serial killer, and he basically presented himself to each one as their perfect victim. And he received many responses. But Gacy, for whatever reason, was the one that he really wanted to keep talking to. He would literally collect calls from Gacy at his home.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I read that book.
It's so good, yeah.
It is, yeah.
And he would say things like Gacy over the phone would tell him to lay on the floor with his head on the floor, but his lower body like kind of on the wall so that his legs and feet were over his head. And Gacy would tell him he wanted him to masturbate onto his own face.
Ugh.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeez.
And this kid would claim he was doing it because for whatever reason, he was doing, I think he took a college course on this kind of thing, which is why he was so committed to it.
Yeah.
And he would eventually meet Gacy in prison.
Whoa.
And he said that what shocked him the most was that when he was brought into the room with Gacy, he was left alone with him. And that during this kind of discussion, Gacy went from super friendly to fucking terrifying. And he was he was like this big football player sized kid, but he said he was so afraid that he couldn't even move. Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
And he walked right into this situation.
Well, luckily Gacy, he flipped the switch and went back to the sweet guy he always was, and they had this conversation and he went on his way. Fucking crazy. Now this kid, I believe his application for the FBI was accepted, and I believe he went on to be an FBI agent, and the book was amazing.
I guess what a resume.
Yeah, it was fucking awesome. So that's not in any of my research. That was just something I remembered reading. So on the morning of May 9th, 1994, Gacy was transferred to Stateville Correctional Center to be executed. That afternoon, he was allowed a private picnic on the prison grounds with his family. And because I know Jameson loves to know this information, his last meal was a bucket of KFC chicken and French fries.
Yeah. All right.
Yep.
His family showed up?
Yeah, it does say with family. I don't know. It doesn't. I never dug deep enough to find out if it was just his sister or if it was his second ex-wife. I'm guessing it was like his sister and his mother. In the hours leading up to Gacy's execution, a crowd that was estimated at over 1,000 people gathered outside the correctional center. A vocal majority were in favor of the execution, although there was a small number of anti-death penalty protesters there. Some of those in favor of the execution wore T-shirts bearing slogans such as, quote, "No tears for the clown," unquote. Before the execution began, the chemicals that were supposed to be used unexpectedly solidified, clogging the IV tube. So the execution team had to replace the clogged tubes before they could resume his execution. That entire process took 18 minutes. Anesthesiologists blamed the problem on the prison's officials' inexperience at conducting an execution. Apparently, this error led to Illinois adopting an alternative method of lethal injection. One prosecutor at Gacy's trial, William Kunkel, said, quote, "He got a much easier death than any of his victims," unquote.
That is the truth.
Yeah, most definitely.
So his final words are reportedly that he said, "Kiss my ass." Although prosecutor William Kunkel stated in 2020 that these words were spoken to a prison official and wasn't part of like any official statement. After Gacy's death was confirmed at 12:58 a.m. on May 10th, 1994, his brain was removed. It is in the possession of Helen Morrison, a witness for the defense at Gacy's trial.
What?
Yep. Who has interviewed Gacy and other serial killers in an attempt to isolate a common personality trait in violent sociopaths. So I guess she's a doctor of some sort.
Wait, so still, how did she get the brain?
They gave it to her. She must have signed an agreement with him or something. Or
yeah, must have like
with
left
the state.
in this will. I leave my brain too.
That'd be amazing. The rest of his body was cremated. So the process of exhuming and identifying the bodies under Gacy's home was a tremendous undertaking. Reports that are out there have spent time going over it all in great detail, and believe me, it's an interesting read, but I'm not going to go through that here.
Yeah.
Suffice to say, the men and women who work diligently to honor the dead deserve our respect.
Absolutely.
Some of those bodies were not identified until 2016 using the most updated DNA technology,
Holy shit.
and others still remain unidentified.
Oh, that's so sad.
Oh.
And now for one interesting note. One of the things Gacy told investigators after his arrest that he had not acted alone in several of the murders. He asked whether his associates had been arrested. When questioned whether these associates had participated directly or indirectly in the killings, Gacy replied directly. He claimed David Cram and Michael Rossi, both who lived with him, were involved in several of the murders. Some defense attorneys and investigators searching for the possibility that Gacy had not acted alone said that there is overwhelming evidence that Gacy worked with an accomplice.
Huh.
In the 1980s, Gacy informed FBI profiler Robert Ressler that, quote, 2 or 3, unquote, PDM employees had assisted in several murders. Ressler believed that there were unexplained avenues to the case and that Gacy had killed more than just the 33 victims. Gacy neither confirmed nor denied Ressler's suspicions.
Wow.
Now, Jeffrey Rignall, who had survived the assault and torture by Gacy, was adamant that at one point during his ordeal, a young man with brown hair had watched his abuse and that he saw a light come on somewhere else in the house as well.
Oh, shit.
3 days before his arrest, 2 officers followed Gacy to a bar where he met 2 employees, Michael Rossi and someone named Ed Hefner.
Huh.
An anxious Gacy was observed walking with the 2 out of earshot of the officers before to talk before returning closer. They said at one point they heard one of the boys say, or Gacy say to one of the boys, "You'd better not let me down, you fuckers. You owe it to me."
Ooh.
The officers then overheard sections of a hushed conversation between Gacy and the 2. At one point, Rossi asked Gacy, quote, "And what, buried like the other 5?" unquote.
Ooh.
In interviews from death row, Gacy said that at the time of his arrest, 3 PDM employees were also considered suspects in the murder, all of whom had keys to his house.
Ooh.
In addition to Cram and Rossi, Gacy named his former employee Philip Pesk, who was a close associate of John Norman, who was an acquaintance of David Cram. In the late 1970s, Norman operated a national sex trafficking ring based in Chicago known as the Delta Project.
Jesus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. At least 2 victims believed to have been murdered by Gacy, Kenneth Parker and Michael Marino, had last been seen alive close to where Norman lived. This led to speculation that Gacy had been connected to trafficking rings. Gacy claimed that he was not in Chicago when 16 of his identified victims disappeared.
What?
In 2012, 2 Chicago lawyers said travel records show that he had been in another state at the time of 3 of the murders.
Whoa.
Investigators note that Robert Young, the traveling companion with whom victim Russell Nelson was visiting in Chicago at the time of his disappearance, gave differing accounts of what happened, of that disappearance. Young filed a missing persons report with the Chicago police before unsuccessfully requesting money from Nelson's parents to finance a search. When Nelson's brother arrived in Chicago to search for him, Young offered him a job at PDM. He was never summoned to testify at Gacy's trial.
Wild.
In 1984, Sam Amarante, Gacy's lawyer, authored procedures that were incorporated by the Illinois General Assembly into the Missing Child Recovery Act of 1984. At the time of the Gacy murders, Illinois police had to wait 72 hours before initiating a search for a missing child or adolescent.
Oh, that's fucked. Yeah, that's way too long.
Yeah. The Missing Child Recovery Act removed that waiting period, and other states subsequently adopted similar procedures. As a result, a national network aimed at locating missing children was gradually formed, and this eventually became known as the Amber Alert.
Wow.
Wow.
And that very long story is the case of John Wayne Gacy.
Well, I think it wasn't just me. I think we all learned some shit today.
Yeah, that's a deep case. Honestly, you should have seen the amount I cut out.
Oh, I believe it. That was insane. It really was. Every time you kept going, I was like, there can't possibly be more. There can't possibly be more. And there just kept being more.
Yeah, well, to be fair, the case that you're going to cover, Samuel Little, there's even more.
It's going to be crazy. It's so many.
I looked it up after kind of doing some research on this when it said he was the number one, like the highest victim count convictions. I was like, okay, who's number one now? Samuel Little.
Still?
Yep.
Holy shit.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
I do have plans to cover the number one in the world someday.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. That's going to be fucked up. Poor South America. That's all I'm going to say.
That'll just be a week-long episode. We'll break it up into 7 parts.
I think I messaged you about this. Israel Keys, our second episode. There's a podcast out there where they take 40 hours.
Yes. Yep.
Breaking down every little detail. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not okay.
40 episodes, an hour long each. I was like, I don't think I can listen to that.
No, absolutely not.
Well, we got to shout them out for our listeners who really want the detail. We should put that in the description.
Yes, look that up on Spotify or whatever you listen to. If you love the Israel Keys case, this podcast goes into so much depth. It's literally 40 hours of material where they break down every little detail of his life. And I'm sure it's amazing. I personally just can't commit to it.
No, but that's the work that went into that is incredible.
Yeah, 100%. I was scrolling through it and they literally break it all down so much that I'm like, maybe I'll listen to that episode. And yeah, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. All right. After this long case, thank you, everybody, if you're still with us. Next week, we will be doing 2 episodes a week. We'll see how that goes for a little bit. So we'll see you next week twice. Thank you for joining us. Yes, I am Janice Dead.
I'm Jameson Dead.
I'm Joyous Dead.
And I'm Shark Dead.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye.